now then. So we've got Gwent patch 10.2 with us now. So another 6 faction, 6 decks. So if you've never watched one of these before or not watched any of my content before, basically what I do on first day of the season is I put together decks that I want to try out or use during the season. And this video kind of serves as a bit of a starting point for some people who aren't too sure what to play for some factions. And just looking for some ideas, or they just want something new to try. It's going to be a deck for each faction, so there's a little something for everyone. I will put in the usual sort of preface because there's always one that misunderstands the point of this. This isn't like a meta snapshot or anything like that. This isn't me saying these are the best decks for each faction. These are just what I'm personally going to try out. I won't ramble on too long before we go into the decks because quite a few to cover, but I think this patch looks kind of interesting. Not as big as I would have hoped. There was some nice changes for NR and siege engines and that kind of thing, and the Nilfgaard stuff was quite interesting, but yeah, I think I would have liked some more expansive kind of changes. As my concern is this season might get a bit stale because I don't expect the meta to shift too much, but obviously we'll have to see. So we'll go straight into the decks. So we start off on a little bit of a boring note for this one. I'm going to be running the Carapace Vampires that I've kind of been running for a long time now. The general idea of this is we're running a lot of vampires, getting diversion, so that Unseen Elder kind of pops off, and we've got like Spear Tip, all the kind of good vampire cards. I think the non-diversion version, which uses like megascopes for spawning several leaders, is probably a little bit better than this, but I just enjoy playing this list. I'm not looking to go too far up the ladder this month, so this is kind of arguably my favourite deck, and since Monsters saw 0 changes from last season, basically anything you were running last season is going to work, and so that's kind of what we're doing here, using the exact deck I was using last season. But it's got a lot of power, to be fair, this one. Certainly in a short round, because of the sheer size that Regis gets to. Unseen Elder is also huge, and yeah, we can get a huge amount of value onto Fledders, so it allows you to bleed quite efficiently in round 2 with your Fledders, have a long round 2, and then go to a super short round with basically Regis, a couple of other sort of big hitters, something like a Gale, or even just Conquerors, you know, players 7s, and you're kind of good to go. I really like the look of the NG changes this season, specifically the Philip van Molenheim seems pretty interesting. Because of the way like Masquerade Ball works, you're always spawning a vampire off of that, because your thirsty dames are vampires. We can quite consistently get the zeal onto Philip. So if anyone that hasn't seen, basically how he works now is a little more complex. So he gets zeal if you already have a vampire, and his order is you give Doomed to a unit, but if it already has a status, you give it Lock instead, and if it already has more than one status, you can Poison it instead, and it has a cooldown of 1. So what this can kind of allow us to do is really farm up things like Thirsty Dames. We can chuck Poison onto several things, we have access to locks, and by running things like Fergus and Faircart, where we can just get buying onto basically everything's going to have one status at least, and then Philip can then locks to him, all that kind of stuff gives us a lot of control. And at 6 power, he's already pretty solid in terms of being resistant to removal. Only things like Parasite are going to take him out. And then in terms of the other stuff, we're running a pretty standard ball kind of list. I haven't played ball in a long time, so we'll see how that one gets on. Also, one of the interesting new things is the Mangonel. So this damages adjacent units when enemy units given spying. So this is basically a 2-point a turn engine if you're giving spying every turn. So really, all you need to do is give spying twice to get a lot of value out of this. If you have a Mangonel down and you play Fergus, for example, it's going to deal 6 damage. That's already 10 for 4, which seems really, really solid. And yeah, it seemed like an interesting one. Something I want to try. We're also running Seditious Aristocrats because we're running Fergus. We're looking to get spying onto a ton of things. So this should be good. It should definitely be good. And yeah, I think it'll probably play out like you would expect Ball to go. You know, you're looking to get Ball and Usurper, very control heavy in around 3. We're also running Double Cross because Double Cross is just generally good. All the Nilf card leaders you can kind of use in any kind of build because they're just solid. And yeah, it's a very, very standard list in terms of what we're actually running. Just Aristocrats get a lot of value. Jobs are good. Now, NR is one of the more interesting ones. So there's been quite a big overhaul in how the interaction between siege engines and warfare cards work. So the majority of siege engines now, if not all, I haven't checked every single one, but the general way they work is with resupply, they basically have the cooldown reduced by 1, which is basically what Reinforced Ballista always had, with the whole when you play a warfare card, reduce the cooldown, that kind of thing. So we're kind of leaning into that a little bit. And there's been some nice little changes to some of the cards as well. So Siege Tower, for example, has the order give itself Vitality 2, cooldown 2, and if you have crew, boost by 2 instead. So with things like Carrot Marine List and Pikeman, you know, sometimes, and also Siege Support, can't forget that. We can sometimes get crew on that, because we're going to be reducing cooldowns constantly. 2.10 engine isn't unreasonable. We also have the pikemen, which are very interesting. They have the order to damage unit by 2, and it reduces the cooldown of all units in the row by 1. So this is kind of a must answer for your opponent, because we can get huge value if this sticks, especially when we're running things like Pencil. And final card I wanted to talk about was Trollalola. So he's had a bit of a change. He has the order to lose all armor and boost self by that amount, and it gains armor, gains 1 armor whenever you use an order. So because we're running a ton of things with orders, his armor is going to get huge, and the way that the armor kind of helps out is not only does it, at the end we can convert it all to points, that armor also protects it from being removed. So it's kind of a must answer threat, needs hard removal, because we can play it as 5 power, maybe give it 2 or 3 armor, for example, on the turn it's played, and then we can start to ramp it up, you know, get up to those really high amounts, especially if we can get quite a few ballistas down, get siege towers down if we played siege itself that turn, for example, throw down a winch, that kind of thing, and going to get very tall. I'm yet to try it out, but I expect him to be maybe need nerfing, in all honesty. But that's our general game plan. We're going for a very cooldown heavy finalist and seeing how that goes. So we'll have to see with this one. Hotel is a little bit boring. There's been some nice changes to Francesca and Salve. So their counters have been dropped to 2 from 3. Which is, you know, pretty nice. Especially with Francesca, in that 3 was kind of clumsy to get up to, because it basically needs to stick for, realistically it needs to stick for at least 2 or even 3 turns, unless you're playing some very specific build that's looking to, you know, proc the counter on the same turn. But a lot of the time it's going to take a little longer. Now at counter 2 we can basically play, you know, have a sorceress down, play Francesca, get his counter to get his count down to 1, and then next turn go for like a Karathi or something if we want to. So it seems pretty solid, and especially at 10 provisions, worth playing. And then for everything else, we're kind of going the Alza route of Orb of Insight spam, get a lot of value off Alza, God at the end, pray it's enough. So in this list, I'm not running a, what's the word? A Mushy Truffle. I think, you know, you could go either way with this. You could put a Mushy Truffle in if you wanted. Personally, just wanted to get Royal Decree and an era, but you know, we can see how it goes. That's arguably something I would consider, swapping out the Decree for a Mushy Truffle, figure out getting that into the list. But yeah, this is pretty much the same kind of spell Skellige list that's been working for a long time. It's just got some help onto some of the cards that weren't really playing it. Makes sense to me. So, yeah, I expect this to do perfectly fine. I don't expect to play too much Skellige. I think there's more interesting stuff to play at the moment. A little weak as a faction. But I'll definitely give this a few games at least. So this is the one I've been most excited for. There's been a bit of support for self-damage Skellige. Now, I've already been running some self-damage Skellige. I think it's pretty fun. And with nerfs to druids, kind of the perfect time, right? So what we got going on is like typical kind of self-damage stuff. We got Tear Siege veterans, hermits, spellboard priests to kind of damage our own stuff and in turn get series out. And then we have a few nice little interactions, all basically centered around the veteran, which are really, really nice. So the way that Idram works, because you're spawning a 1 power copy, because veterans, if their power is below 3, they're going to bump themselves back up to 8. What you can do is you can play a veteran, play a Megascope, and then that'll do the 1 turn tick. The next turn you play Idoran, Megascope spawns an 8, and then Idoran spawns a 1, which then boosts itself up to 8. So Idoran is 14 on deploy. And then if he sticks, it gets stupid because then you can Megascope again. You can also, if your Idoran's on the board, place Farbob Totem, which then, because it spawns those fanatics, Idoran will spawn a fanatic with 1 power, which will flip it into a 6 power unit. Mushy Truffle, much of the same. You spawn a little Havru, and the Havru has the order to damage itself by 4 to use rain. Its power being at 1 is fine. And yeah, that's a lot of points for the deck. Is through this like Idoran combo. There's a lot of value to be had there. We've also got some new stuff in there. So we've got Knut. So he's been changed so that now it's an order that you damage an ally unit by half its power, damaging it by the same amount. If he has 5 or less power, it's going to refresh that ability, which is really, really nice. So what this kind of allows us to do is, because we're not running anything that needs our leader, we can put Knut down to 5, have this basically damage a Tear Siege veteran by 4 every single turn, ping the opponent, and because Tear Siege veterans, you can just hit them with a Spellboard Priest, for example, which would then put it down to 3, put it back up to 8. We can go again and just keep cycling that, basically 4 damage a turn. Really, really good. One of them I'm not sure about is Sigvold. So this is a very long description, but whenever he's damaged by abilities, he gains bleeding for the same amount, for the same duration instead. So if you would hit him for 10 damage, he's gonna get 10 bleeding instead. Doesn't get damaged. And he has the order that you can damage a unit by the amount of bleeding on himself, and then purify away that bleeding. And if it's an enemy, he damages himself by that amount. If it's an ally, he boosts himself by that amount. So there's some really nice synergies here. We can obviously keep stacking up damage onto him just naturally with things like our priest and hermit and leader and blah 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 blah, all that kind of stuff. And then we can transfer that bleeding kind of wherever we want. We can use it as a very, very large piece of removal. Ping one of the opponent's cards, for example, which will kill himself, but if there's need to remove, we can hit our own stuff. So because he boosts himself by that amount, what we can do is hit something small. So that Sigvold, say, has 10 bleeding, for example. What you can do is then hit a little Havru with like 2 power, kill the Havru, boost himself by 10, plays for 8. That's the general plan anyway, is there's a lot of synergy between self-damage stuff, so we're just gonna see if these new cards make it even better than it already was, because it's already kind of playable. So yeah, we'll see with this one. And to round us out, we've got Syndicate. And for Syndicate, I'm going back to Collusion. I've not played Collusion in quite a while, but it's kind of my favourite decks, so we're gonna have a little bit of that. So for anyone who doesn't know how Collusion works, you basically get increased value on the Collusion card based on how many different crime tags you have out. The Crown Splitters will boost your lowest unit by 4. Cut-ups will damage the strongest enemy by 4. Fire Swarm will spawn 2 Zealots, 4 points. Tide Cloaks will give you 4 coins. And Blind Eyes will increase all other effects by 1. So the idea is that if we can get all 5 categories down, we boost the unit by 5, damage unit by 5, spawn 6 points worth of Fire Swarm Zealots, and we gain 5 coins, which is a lot of value to come out of a 10 provision card. Now, we run this in Pirate's Curve because there are very, very nice things you can do to make this a little easier, because obviously getting 5 gang categories down is a lot clumsy. What we look to do is we want to get a Blind Eyes, a Cut-Ups, and a Fire Swarm on the board. Now, in terms of getting Blind Eyes down, have Kalkstein, Apothecary, Peaches, and I think that's actually it for our Blind Eyes. It could be wrong, but yeah, I think that's all of them. For cut-ups, we have Freakshirt, we have Junior, and Bloody Good Friends. So kind of get any of those to stick and we're good to go. And then for Fire Swarm, we have Von Hurst and we have Helvede. Now, both of these are very, very good because although we're only running a couple of Fire Swarm, because they're spawning Zealots, which your opponent's not bother with removing, these will still count for Fire Swarm. Say you play Helvede and you spawn a couple of Zealots and they kill your Helvede, you've still got your Fire Swarm tag on the board, so you're still happy. So once you've got your tags on the board, you want to use your leader ability, which will spawn a Sea Jackal, which is a Tide Cloak, so that's your 4th tag, and then you use Furker to basically play the Collusion from your deck. He's a Crown Splitter, get all your value. And this makes it a bit deceptive because it seems like it should be a long round deck because it takes long to set up. But doing it this kind of way means you can really kind of get away with doing this in even like a 4-card round. If your hand falls right, you can do this in a 4-card round, so super short rounds. Also, one thing to consider is you don't always have to get the perfect Collusion for it still to be good. You know, 4 tags, even 3 tags. 3 tags is still solid. It's 12 for 10. It's still a fair few points, and since you can naturally get 2 tags from Furker and your leader, basically Collusion gets value if you have 1 unit on the board, which is kind of nuts. So yeah, I'm gonna play a bit more Collusion. It's been a while. It's been a long, long while. And that is it for our 6 decks. I think there's some interesting stuff to do, as I kind of mentioned. Concern things will get stale, since there's not really been too many changes, but we'll just have to see. The changes to Jackpot are obviously really nice. I think we'll probably see a lot less Jackpot floating about, which I'm pretty pleased about. And that may well open the doors for some other decks to actually be able to compete. So we'll have to see. I don't want to call it too soon and say it's going to be the same meta, but yeah, we will just have to see. So hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you in the next one.